Hello and welcome everyone. Today I'm going to talk about Kubernetes, one of my favorite topics. And then this time I'm going to talk about how you can maintain and manage Kubernetes from a Kubernetes deployment perspective. How do you view their events and logs? What kind of dashboard you're going to use? My name is Riju and I work for Microsoft as a cloud solution architect. I can be reached at my Twitter, which is my handle given here. So please reach out and ask question if you want to clarify anything. Now, what do we want to talk about? Like first understand what is what, why we need certain things, not the other thing, right? So we have got multiple options available, which would allow us to create end-to-end monitoring solution using a couple of tools available. As the Kubernetes is an open source technology, so the world of open source uses certain de facto standards. And what Microsoft Azure has done in the managed AK space is that they have welcomed all those open source technologies and then build that end-to-end experience, which the skill set is already available in the market and people can continue to implement the same thing. These are all time tested, managed and healthy solution available already. So we start with Prometheus. So what do you mean by Prometheus? So it's an open source solution which can collect your metrics, it can store your data, it can build an alert, and then it also gives you PromQL, that's Prometheus QL, query language to get the data from the raw data source. Using Prometheus, what we can do, you can collect the time series data from the Kubernetes cluster, which can collect a lot of information from many different, let's say, signals. Now, if you come to the Prometheus and the Kubernetes, the data is now collected. Now, what will happen with the data? You're not going to write the raw query every time you need something. You will build a dashboard, and that dashboard can be built using many different tools, but one of the very common tools which open source world uses is Grafana. So the Grafana is an interactive visualization tool which allows you to build a custom dashboard. You can connect to the Prometheus data source. You can build alert and notification. It's a very user friendly, and as I said, like it's an open source technology. It has got a very strong community also available, and it's always up to date, and you will have no gap in knowledge in terms of how to do certain things. If you ask this question, you will get an immediate answer. So the community is very, very strong. So what we have done initially with Azure is that we brought in the Kubernetes as a fully managed platform. Now you have got the managed Prometheus and managed Grafana also available as part of the Azure Monitor offering, which gives you sort of like end-to-end monitoring for the cloud native Kubernetes kind of workload. So let's see how that experience looks like when you start building that Kubernetes cluster, enabling these components as part of the cluster creation. So let me open my subscription, and if I go into this Kubernetes services, and if I go and create a new cluster, once you create a new cluster, step-by-step things comes and it helps us learn and explain things. So let me just maximize the screen size. So you can see that I can choose a resource group, existing resource group. It's not a big thing. So you can create a new one if you don't like this. And after that, you can actually choose what kind of cluster it will be. Is it a production standard cluster? Which means that you are doing some development, let's stay close to the production. Is it what you want to create? Or you want to create a dev test cluster, right? And then you also have a production economy, which allows you to save the cost in the cluster. And the production enterprise is something which definitely, as the name suggests, you'll be choosing while you are doing that. So you can select any one and you can give a name. Let's say I just give a name. And then you select the region where you want to deploy this thing. So you have got 50 plus regions. You choose one. And if you want to make sure that your clusters are zone aware, you select the zone, otherwise you just remove them. And then the pricing tier is free or standard. Now free, as the name suggests, is free for the management part of it, but the VM and the storage, whatever you are using as part of the node creation, will be charged. So it is not fully free. So make sure that you don't have that illusion that free means fully free. You will still have a charge if you run a Kubernetes cluster, because there are other components which are not free. But the standard comes with not only the SLA, the service level agreement, but also certain benefits of, let's say, connecting to ACR, etc. So we'll see that, networking, all these things. Kubernetes is an open source, upstream open source. So we pick it up and then we keep adding them to the list. And you can see that with the recommended default one is 1.26, but we have 1.28 in preview. That this preview doesn't mean that the Kubernetes is in preview. It probably is GA'd, but Microsoft Azure, the AKS, the Azure Kubernetes Services, has not yet fully tested and gathered enough data to release it as fully production ready Kubernetes, right? So that's why you see this preview. So this preview is when we brought in the Kubernetes that released Kubernetes to Azure, we have to go through a certain testing process, and that is what it is indicating that we are doing those testing. So that's why you see this little indication. And then you have got a couple of options, like whether you want to patch it automatically. Patch means that it is not going to change your minor version. That is 1.26 to 2.7. It is going to add the patches. So it means that if you are choosing 1.26, and today if it is .1, tomorrow it will be .2, .3. These are all patches. So this is how you, and then you can actually say enable in stable, which is N-1. That's the strategy for all the big customers when they choose any service. And then there are disabled, you want to control manually and do things on your own. So you just need to make sure that everything works before anybody updates anything. So you have got the Kubernetes authorization and authentication available, authentication first and then authorization available. So what do you want to select? Do you want to select Azure AD, or you want to continue with the raw Kubernetes way? So we'll say local account and RBAC. Now remember one thing, though we call it user account in Kubernetes, it's not user or account. They are essentially the certificates which we want to use. So just make sure that you understand that the difference from a Kubernetes perspective, and then you can see that you have got the Kubernetes agent pool, and then you have got pools. You can select the agent pool and then build something on top of it. So you can actually modify this Kubernetes cluster and say that I want to, that's saying auto scale. I don't want to, I say manual. I just need 2 copies. That should be enough. And then I'm done with it. So you can actually update the Kubernetes node pool where your actual pods will be deployed. So this is first one. It's sort of like an auto scalable. So it starts with minimum 2 and goes up to 5 and stops there. So you have multiple different options. If you don't want to, let's say, continue using this node pool, you can also use virtual nodes, which means that it will use Azure Container Instance, ACI, where you can deploy, and then it is seamless. The disk description, encryption, so you do not need any special thing unless it is super critical. So let's leave it as is. After that, what you can do, you can choose the networking. Now Kubernetes does provide you some of the built-in open source networking capability. So when I say networking, every time you create a pod, you get an IP. Who provides that IP? That's what the networking configuration you need to provide. If you use the KubeNet, that is a very common one, it will be easy and simple. But if you use Azure CNI, then you have to build it as part of that process, which means that you need to decide what will be the subnet range and what are the IPs that you want to assign to whom, etc., etc. You can define that. So you can enable private cluster, which means that you can't just like publicly access it. You need to be part of the network to be able to access it. You want to set unauthorized IP ranges for public access, even if it is private. You define that and go ahead and do that. So it's sort of like a firewall thing. So you can actually say that, you know what, I know my admin sits in that office and that office has this IP. So let's only allow that IP because I don't want anybody to get into somebody. My Kubernetes is control plane. They should not be able to run the admin activity over there and do all sort of things. Bring your own network means you have your own network. So you just define the Azure virtual network, and that's bring your own network. I will leave the kubenet as is, and then I will say that I have a DNS prefix, and then from a network policy perspective. So network policy, you can define all those rules, regulation, restriction from an access point of view, like all these things. So it's an open source. Calico is an open source technology. You can also use, let's say, Azure policies. You can choose to have a none. So if you choose to have none, there'll be no networking policy. You have the load balancer standard available. And then if you go into that Azure Monitor, right, you come to that container registry. You can pick up a registry from where you want to deploy. So let's leave it like that. So you don't need a registry at this point in time. We'll use public registry for this demo. So on that Azure Monitor part, this is important aspect. This is where you need to be a bit more focused, because you are actually going to enable the monitoring from the start of it. So as a custom configuration, that means I want to monitor my own way. So, and then it asks you to enable a couple of things inside that. Enable container logs. If I mark this checkbox, and then it will ask me to select a workspace where the data will be stored. It's like a data storage, or I can create a new. I can select an existing one or create a new. If you want to use managed identity, that will be provided by the Active Directory, so that you can seamlessly access the log analytics workspace through the managed identity, not through the key, which is simple pure text. The managed identity is where also allows you to access things sort of like a seamless. So if you want to disable somebody else's access, you can delete that managed identity. It's gone. So managed Prometheus is something which is now available in Azure. So you can see that it is managed, right? That word is very important. It's not like you can also build a normal Kubernetes cluster in AKS and then bring in Prometheus and Grafana, but will be managed by you. It will be deployed as an YAML file to a pod in form of container. It will keep running. So all these things you can do. That's what people are doing today. But it is managed. That means it will be maintained and managed by Microsoft. So we will make sure that those codes are patched clearly and all these things. So you can choose a monitoring workspace and point to that from workspace or create a new one. Managed Grafana is the dashboarding capability. Once the data is collected in the Prometheus, comes to Grafana, and you can actually see that Grafana also needs a workspace. So you can either select or create a new one. And after that, you want to configure the alert. So I have configured the alert. It's a default one, so you can change that and then add additional alert also. When the CPU usage percent is greater than 95%, then give me an alert. So something like that you can always do. And then if you go here in Azure policy, it says enable or disable. So let's leave it like that. We are not focusing too much on that area. And then the resource group for the cluster, which it will be creating, is going to be, you can always name the change the name to something which is readable, acceptable as per the convenience. And then you will say next. After you say next, basically you can provide the tag information and say create and review and create. So that's what the final step would look like. However, and it takes few minutes because it has to build a couple of virtual machines, configure the Kubernetes, and do stuff over there. Now, if you look into this, you basically see that I have already a Kubernetes cluster created and it is running, configured the way I just showed you, right? Now, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to connect this Kubernetes cluster using kubectl. So let me bring in you can also do it from Cloud Shell, but let me bring it here. So if you say kubectl get pod, that basically gives me the list of pods running in the Kubernetes cluster. Right now, there are 2 pods running. You can see that the Nginx is running and this one is running. That means this is running for a couple of hours, 12 and 11. If I go back to my insights and then say that I want to see that what exactly is happening here, it takes me to the Azure Monitor Insights. And then you can see that it asked me whether I want to view the Grafana. This is configured already because I selected it. Now it is linking my Grafana, and I can directly go to the dashboard of my Grafana. I can either configure it and modify it, but I can go to the Grafana dashboard. If I go to the Grafana dashboard now, it takes me to the dashboard where it must show some information. So let me just connect to the dashboard by using my same Azure credentials, which I'm using to connect to this Azure portal, and then the Grafana dashboard pops up, right? And if you go a little down, let me see that recently viewed dashboard. You can always view different dashboard. You can see that it is showing some information. So let me go to the default namespace, choose the Nginx. It's a very simple Nginx controller container, so it doesn't have enough thing happening unless you access it heavily. There is an also web deployment that uses container, but because it is behind the deployment, it keeps monitoring. So there's a bit of CPU activity happening, but this one is kind of dead. So let me try making some magic inside that. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to go inside this Nginx container and try to disturb it a bit more. So let me do that. So let me go a little down, and I say Kubernetes kubectl execc, that's execute, and give the name of the container. So I say that, and then I see that -it, that's interactive terminal, and then I run bin sh. Hopefully this should connect me inside that container. I can go inside. So this is within the container Nginx pod. There is a container running, so I'm within that container. Now what I'm going to do is that I'm going to use a tool called Stress. It's something which I downloaded using apt install. So the Stress tool is something which I'm going to use to create a bit of noise inside the container. So what this Stress really does, let's clean it up. So look, what this Stress really does, it allows me to simulate some CPU heavy activity. So let me run that over here. So if I say Stress, and then I run -- CPU, and I have got only 2 CPUs, so I'll say 2. I simulate the 2 CPU, and then I say timeout. So in this timeout, I'm gonna give some 36 seconds. This is gonna do some activity. Now, as it is doing, you can see the yellow bar popped up, which essentially means that there is a busy activity happening now in the Nginx. So you can see that in the Grafana dashboard behind the scene, there is some bit of activity started, right? So you can see that this is kind of collecting the data in this Prometheus dashboard. This one is the dashboard I'm talking about, and then this is the cluster I'm connected to, and then I'm using the default namespace, and I'm going into the pod. So I'm monitoring each of this. So you can build those alerts. So if you change it to, let's say, UTC local time, or let's say last 15 minutes maybe, then you can see that there's a bit of activity happening. I can probably reduce it to, let's say, last 5 minutes maybe. Now we can see that it's much more, let's say, wider in the sense, and will be updating pretty quickly, right? You can see that this is kind of like collecting, not only collecting the data, but also doing a dashboarding. So these dashboards are completely customizable. You can customize it. I picked up the default one, but there are many more other data which comes up otherwise if you are using. So it says that you have got container, and inside the container you have that Nginx, and you can see the memory usage here, and you can see all other bandwidth, transaction bandwidth, rate of packets, and all this information comes here with a nice little information. Not only that, if you go to this container insights, right, this also gives you a bit more information, right? So it's not Grafana, but it's within the Azure, but you get to see like a lot of different report. What is the disk path? So let's say syslog. This will be an interesting one. So I want to see the syslog usage. So you can actually view the syslog and then do that. So it's gonna go ahead and bring you all the data here, and then you can do all sort of things. So if you want to really view what's going on over here, this is the place you should be looking at but you need to configure it. So it also talks about nodes, containers, controllers, all this data. And then you will see that I have got, let's say, containers running, 2 of them. So it will be displayed over here. But also it talks about your infrastructure, that is cluster. And you can change the filter. You can do all sort of things. And this is a very nominal configuration by which you can enable the monitoring capability in Kubernetes. Thank you very much and have a great day.